seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is stamping out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible smith sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
Hello there. This is Shane Trejo, along with my co-host Rocco Lucente, on the first Liberty Conservative podcast hosted by Defiant America. We're coming to you this week after the contentious midterm elections when things are getting really, really crazy. So we definitely want to cover all these different issues pertaining to the election and the fallout from it. But first, we kind of want to get into who we are and what we're trying to do with the podcast. So, Rocco, if you care to go into your own history as an activist, feel free to.
Absolutely. So, I started with Libertarian activism in 2010. I actually discovered it through the Rand Paul Senate campaign, and then I really did the deep dive. And, by the time the Senate primary was over, I was a full-fledged Ron Paul Republican. And during the 2012 campaign, I did some volunteer work in Iowa. I also did some volunteer work locally. I helped organize Schuyler County for Ron Paul, where we had the best percentage outcome of any county in the state in the Republican primary. And then I got on board with the beginning of the Liberty Conservative. So, and I've also been a part of the Republican Party in certain aspects. I was a town Republican Party chairman and have assisted in various Republican causes around central New York as well. And really, my purpose here, I think, is to convince libertarians of a more viable political path. Because if we're honest about it, libertarian growth has stalled since 2012, and that really manifested in 2016, obviously, with the Rand Paul 2016 campaign. And in 2018, we saw a lot of Liberty candidates go down. We saw Chris McDaniel go down. We saw Eric Brakey go down. We saw a lot of really good people who couldn't get over the hump and get the victory. And I think that a part of that is because we need to enact on a more viable political path. We need to understand that the only way to get elected as a libertarian is as a liberty conservative. And that actually works very well with our philosophy, because at the core of conservatism is libertarianism. So really, I believe that means we need to be both liberty and conservative and try to keep the moral framework of conservatism within our platform. So I think that's part of why I'm here at the very least. There's certainly more reasons to it, such as the lack of a future in the Gary Johnson, Bill Weld libertarianism of doubling down on social liberalism and cultural Marxism. I really would like to push back against that with this podcast. And finally, to promote a more sustainable lifestyle and sort of change this tide of libertarians being known for promoting degenerate cultures, drugs, sexual promiscuity, the demeaning of, the Christian faith specifically, and to promote a more lifestyle that is more based in a morality that can be sustained in a free society. So I really look forward to doing all of that with this podcast. I'm excited to get started here with you. And I'm ready to go forward.
Absolutely, man. I'll go into a little bit more about my history. I got started way back in 2006 when, really the whole political sphere was totally different. It was still the Bush era. Karl Rove still dreamed of having a permanent Republican neocon majority regarding the gay marriage issue. They thought that would put them in the driver's seat forever. That's how delusional the Bush era Republicans were. And, I got radicalized against them, their awful policies, learning different truths about what happened in terms of 9/11 and our foreign policy really opened my eyes. And then when Ron Paul showed up, that's when I really started really paying attention and really getting involved as an activist. Started, with the Libertarian Party. I'm ashamed to admit now, but that was how I got my foot in the door. And then when the Tea Party happened, I definitely moved over to the Republican side of things and have gone further to the right since then. I think that what I bring with this podcast, in my perspective, is I've been at this longer than a lot of the libertarians, in particular the libertarians who sort of came of age during the Rand Paul campaign. They really have kind of been black-pilled. They've really, shot themselves in the foot because of all the recent setbacks regarding the liberty movement. Since, in particular, since 2016, it's really, gone into shambles. But I think that, with my perspective, I can really, I was in the from the days when you talk to people about libertarianism and they'd be like, a librarian? You're a librarian? You like books? And that would be the normal message you'd hear when you talk about this with people. But then when Ron Paul showed up in 2008, people knew what libertarians were. We were in the mix. 2012, the message was really taking off. We were getting all kinds of reps into office and senators even in certain cases. And Ron Paul did really well in the 2012 presidential campaign. Really should have won Iowa that year. Won a lot of delegates and really, just changed the framework of the party. Went above and beyond the call of duty to get the message out. And I think that a lot of what Ron Paul did laid down the framework for Trump to come in and do what he's done. So I really see that bridge between the Paul line of thinking and the Trump leadership from the presidency. I think that's the connection we need. That's the connection that's going to give the liberty movement its renaissance, its second wind. And with Rand Paul forging the bonds with President Trump, in particularly over his foreign policy, which has been maligned by the powers that be. Trump's been chummy with Russia. He's mended fences with North Korea. He's talking with the Taliban, and he's putting the onus on these globalist countries for not paying their fair share and raking us over the coals and taking our money for their defense and neglecting their own borders and their own national defense because they're using America like a piggy bank. So Trump has been, he has not been a Ron Paul steward, and it's particularly in terms of his means toward the end. He'll use sanctions, he'll make threats, he'll even with the in Afghanistan, he sent more troops in there. So in terms of the means, there's a lot to be desired, but in terms of the ends, Trump has definitely shown that he wants peace with all the different nations of the world. Even when he's talking tough with them or sanctioning them, the idea is to get them to cut a deal that works for everyone and makes the world more peaceful. So I think particularly on the foreign policy issue, Trump's a godsend. He's a million times better than a neocon, better than anything we could have expected realistically. Think about this, and this is from talking from my perspective, is that in 2008 they said that Ron Paul wanted to pal around with dictators, and that was the political football that was used to ruin him in 2008. That was a talking point that really had gained a lot of resonance with the right wingers and Tea Party people who might have otherwise supported Ron Paul. 10 years later, Trump's literally palling around with dictators. So that's what I think the quantum leap in terms of from Ron Paul's vision to we're actually seeing it in a very odd, strange way, to be sure, but we're seeing it enacted by Trump in a lot of different ways. We're seeing Trump push back on the sovereignty issue, against NAFTA, against the borders. Ron Paul once said, let's take the troops out of Afghanistan and Iraq and let's put them at the border to protect our borders. And we've seen that with the caravan issue. Trump is willing to do that. It's caused a lot of chaos. And with this podcast, what we want to do is we want to become a relevant media outlet for 2020 in helping President Trump regain re-election and putting the liberty movement on a more stable footing moving into 2024. And then 2024, we want to push a liberty candidate, whether it's Senator Paul, Matt Bevin, Thomas Massey, whoever else steps up to the plate. We want to be a part of pushing that liberty-minded candidate as Donald Trump's successor in 2024. So that's a big task, and we're going to work at it, little by little over the course of doing this podcast. But those are our goals, and we really think that with the Rand Paul Trump alliance in particular, there's really a bright future for the liberty movement if libertarians and liberty-minded conservatives are smart enough to roll with the punches, organize in the GOP, and not go out of their way to be dicks to potential allies.
And Shane, I think that really I'm glad you went into depth with the Trump issue, because I sort of buried the lead in my portion of the introduction, which is the unprecedented opportunity that the Trump era represents to libertarians. I think you're right that I've seen a lot of folks who are black-pilled, which for people who don't know what that means, it essentially means that they've given up and they think that this is over. But I have never seen more opportunity within the liberty movement to gain a foothold within the Republican Party based on the issues that are being presented in the media and in politics at the moment. The Republican voters are losing confidence in the national security establishment. We have never had a Republican Party that is more skeptical of the FBI, more skeptical of the CIA, more skeptical of the national intelligence community in general, and more ripe for arguments on issues like the Patriot Act, the NSA, Fourth Amendment type privacy issues. We can really establish a foothold in the Republican Party and become the standard bearer on a number of key issues. And it really goes even deeper than that. Trump is igniting a renewed skepticism of institutions that were once held dear within the Republican Party at an unprecedented rate. All of a sudden, the idea that we should be able to negotiate with people like Kim Jong-un or Vladimir Putin, which was once considered sacrilegious within the Republican Party, has become a Republican position. And we see only the most hardcore conservatives and even mainstream conservatives like Tucker Carlson and some others are the first to defend Trump on these issues now. And I think that renewed skepticism presents an unprecedented opportunity that we cannot blow. And we must make sure that we play this right and become the standard bearer on those issues to set the stage for 2024, to set the stage for future congressional elections. I think really my number one goal with this podcast is to set the roadmap for how we make libertarianism the blueprint for conservative action going forward. So I just wanted to say that before we moved on from the intro segment, because it is such an important part of what we're going to be doing here.
No doubt about it. And just to address what some skeptical libertarians might be thinking, Trump, on an issue by issue basis, there's issues where he's not particularly good on. Privacy, he's not very good. Gun rights, he's been shaky. On trade, it's good that he's getting out of the globalist trade deals, but he's not. He's doing a tariff push, and that could backfire. Obviously, tariffs are taxes, and taxation's theft, and that's bad and whatnot. So on individual issues, you certainly can nitpick the man, but in a bigger sense of the word, the style of Trump, the way Trump can't stop being Trump for 1 second, and the way he's triggering and inflaming the left and forcing them to show their true colors. He's a cultural force that is doing an incredible amount of good, and he's got all the bad guys, all the neocons and the leftists. He's got them all backed into a corner, and they seem to be doubling down on like the worst possible position. So this man, Trump, is an incredible talent politically. He says he's a stable super genius or whatever, but I do believe in a real sense he is a genius in terms of being a master manipulator and understanding that the policies don't matter. It's the personalities and the strong rhetoric that matters politically. So Trump just gets certain things innately that make him an incredible political force. And he's good enough on the issues and willing to listen to Rand Paul on issues like foreign policy and healthcare. So I say definitely work with him. And we're going to be promoting that as we do this podcast. But moving on into the issues, first thing we wanted to cover was the elections this past week. I know I've heard a lot of people have been really down. They feel that the election sort of empowered and emboldened the radical left. I'm kind of, in the middle on that. Rocco, what do you think about this past week's elections?
Well, obviously we did not get everything that we wanted in the election on Tuesday. However, it's also true that there was no blue wave, and the numbers bear out very clearly that there was no blue wave. So when you look at the history of the first midterm after a presidential election, you have only two times where somebody did not lose seats during that first midterm election. In 1934, during the Great Depression under FDR, and then right after 9/11 under George W. Bush. Even when you include those two outliers, it's only 35 House seats that is on average the swing. And when you exclude those two exceptions, the average loss for the incumbent party during the first midterm of a president is 41 seats. Now, when you look at the House races right now, it's looking like we're going to end up being down by somewhere 27, 33 seats. There's still a few elections that haven't been called, and that can put things into that can swing things a little bit. But the bottom line is it looks like Donald Trump is going to have below average levels of losses in the House side of the midterms. Now, on the Senate side, we've had some gains in the midterms, and we don't know how large those gains are going to be. There's still some issues that I'm sure we'll be getting into pretty soon here with those Senate races. But the bottom line is there will be some gains. So looking like we'll end up with somewhere between 52 to 54 seats in the Senate. And that is going to enable us to push the Republican agenda forward, particularly with all these anti-Trump Republicans who have now left the picture. So there are some people who are upset. They think the radical left has been enabled. Certainly, the reactions of the radical left during the last few days bear out the idea that they feel enabled. However, if this election was about Trump, then I think that Trump did pretty well because his losses in the House were below average, and he gained seats in the Senate, and even managed to win some races that people didn't think he was going to win, such as the Ohio governor's race. So I'm very encouraged going into 2020. I think that it's probably going to be quite the war, but our side is enthused. We're ready to go, and people will lick their wounds, and we'll get right back to it. And once Trump rallies are starting during the Democrat primaries, when all those people are going crazy, there's not going to be any enthusiasm following. I have a very good feeling.
Yeah, I mean, it's all very much up in the air. It's really hard to say, but I do think that in a way it's a pretty good outcome for the Republicans. What happened? We're all hoping that the Republicans would keep the House, but that would have taken a Herculean task. And considering the media and the all the unprecedented level of propaganda, and people being whipped into frenzies, by these leftist Democrat terrorists, ordered from the top, and we'll talk about that more later. But with all this stuff happening, the fact that the House losses were lower than average, lower than they were for when the Tea Party rebuked President Obama, lower than when the kind of the precursor of the Tea Party rebuked President Clinton. It really is a miracle. It really shows just how powerful Trump is, how those crazy rallies that he does, it works like a dream. People go to those rallies, they go out, they're enthused, they move mountains, they hit doors like mad dogs. I know and plus in a lot of these different areas, the losses were not because of Trump at all. It was because of the corrupt and ineffectual state GOP. Perfect example of that is in Michigan, where Michigan put up a guy for governor who sunk the entire ticket named Bill Schuette. Schuette was reviled by the grassroots conservatives. He's been in politics for 30 years, career politician, been running for governor for like a decade now. And he thought he was entitled to this position, was a lazy campaigner, never spoke in anything but, the political speak. It's the exact opposite of the Trump Republican. And although Trump did support this man and endorsed him, he did not come and do a rally here before the campaign. And that's when I knew it was going to be a rough election when Trump didn't come to town, because he didn't want the stink of Schuette on him. I don't blame him, because this party did everything they could to lose. But even in Michigan, where we got smoked, where we got a blue governor, we got some bad ballot initiatives passed. But even here, we kept the House and the Senate. So it's not a horrendous situation. The Democratic, it's really, a lot of it is about the weakness of the Democratic Party. There probably would not be a solid Senate majority of Republicans if they had not overreached on the Kavanaugh debacle. Even though the Kavanaugh, that definitely, it didn't last as long as we wanted it to. It would have been nice if it happened a week or so later, but that still resonated. Most of the people who voted against Kavanaugh out of cowardice have lost their job. So that's very much good news. And I think that overall, with the Democrats winning the House like they did, they're going to overreach. They're going to put up, every token idiot they can imagine, like Maxine Waters. I mean, putting Maxine Waters in the head of the Financial Services Committee is going to make the Republican points for us. We're going to be able to. I mean, there's going to be the things she's going to say, the way she's going to overreach. And of course, because the Democrats believe in they're blind practitioners of identity politics, they're going to defend Maxine Waters no matter what, no matter how stupid she sounds, no matter what ridiculous nonsense she says, because she's a black woman. So that's the way they think. I think it's already backfired on them spectacularly. They're going to overreach. They're going to obstruct. Trump's going to be like, oh, let's do jobs. Let's do infrastructure. Let's do immigration. Let's focus on these key building blocks for our society to help the country. And the Democrats are going to be standing in their path all the time going into 2020. And plus, Trump will be at the top of the ticket in 2020. So I believe that even though we lost this battle, we're winning the war. We're going to win back the House in 2020, barring some unforeseen circumstance, with bigger majorities. And after that, the Democrats will really be shitting bricks as Trump's, a lame duck president, not having to worry as much about the media and about the voters. He can just do, what he wants, what he thinks is best for America. And then, the libs will really be shitting bricks at that point. But, we'll see. I don't see any way Trump loses in 2020. I think he's pretty much unbeatable. That's why the Democrats want to impeach him over nothing. That's why they've pushed this Russia thing to the nth degree, even though it's pretty obvious there's nothing there. It's because they're terrified of actually having to go up against Trump in 2020 with all the momentum behind him, with him, enacting the tariffs to get the Rust Belt voters back on his side, with a lot of union support behind Trump, with Trump being, more popular than usual amongst minorities even. Everything's lining up for them to lose in 2020 to Trump. And hopefully Trump's security detail is working overtime, because it wouldn't surprise me if these terrorist gangs of thugs on the left took a pass at Trump's life sometime in the next couple of years. They're that desperate.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And as far as 2020 goes, I think that we have to come out very strong. We have to put on the full court press just like we did in the 2016 campaign. One thing that's very encouraging is Trump's fundraising numbers. He's raised an unprecedented amount of money so far in this cycle. But, I think we need to absolutely do everything we can and get the people out to vote, because the Democrats are going to have their turnout machine drummed up more than ever. And if we think that things were bad in this past cycle in terms of the lies and the thug tactics and the literal terrorism in some cases that occurred, you just wait until this next cycle. And that's one real message that we need to get across to libertarians in particular, is that this is increasingly turning into something greater than a political battle. And at some point, you have to pick a side, and you have to decide whether or not you are going to fight for some of the freedoms that are on the line here. And among those freedoms is to have a political process that is free of the sort of violent threats that we have seen in recent weeks, the sort of character assassination that has become the standard operating procedure of the left, and the tactics that we saw with Brett Kavanaugh. So obviously we're not going to be getting started with the 2020 campaigning for a few months now, but I think that once it does get started, we have to all be on board. We have to press forward and really try to do everything we can, because you say you don't see any way that we can lose it. I see a way we can lose it. We won 3 big states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, by fairly small margins. We're going to have to mount campaigns in those states that are as aggressive and convincing as anything we've ever done. So I'm going to be doing my part, trying to get into Pennsylvania as much as I can from my spot in southern New York. I know that you're going to be doing everything you can in Michigan. That's just what we got to do going forward, because if the left wins, the consequences will be grave, and we all need to realize that.
And in Michigan, it's very promising, too, with the state GOP cratering. I think it's going to give us a great opportunity to get in a very pro-Trump leadership team in most counties, as well as the state, going forward into 2020. So although we got creamed last week in Michigan, I don't think we'll get creamed in 2020. I think we're going to be able to right the ship well before that and make sure that Trump can win this state again, and hopefully we'll have more of a presence and challenging the elections in Detroit, where there were plenty of voter anomalies, where it's likely that the ballots were getting stuffed, that there were more votes cast in certain precincts than registered voters by a wide margin. So that type of stuff that we're going to have our eyes on from the get-go, making sure that crap doesn't happen and that it's exposed and that the lawbreakers are thrown in jail, even if we don't get help from the Secretary of State, who is now a hardcore liberal, unfortunately. But let's dovetail into the terrorism that's going on from the left. There's been a lot of instances of this recently. I've watched a digital lynch mob online attempt to say that Gab, which is a free speech social network, that Gab should be held criminally responsible for a terrorist who committed acts of terror against Jews at a synagogue in Pittsburgh, because he posted on that platform, because his free speech rights were respected on that platform, even though he had other social media accounts on more mainstream platforms. That the one that supports free speech, Gab, should be held liable. And it was Howard Dean, former head of the DNC, who said that they should be charged as accessories to murder for supporting freedom of speech. And this is, again, I just wanted to bring up Dean because this is not a few fringe actors. You can always grab someone on the fringes, on the right or the left, who sounds like an idiot or is crazy. Obviously, there's plenty of those people out in this day and age. Their voices are amplified more than ever. but it's not coming from a few fringe idiots. It's coming from the top. It's coming from the people who are actually in charge of the Democratic Party and the people who have great sway in the liberal movement of nowadays, the leftist movement, I should say, 'cause it's not very liberal. So you're seeing this from the top, and another ghastly instance recently happened at the Metropolitan Republican Club, where a diverse group of activists, a lot of Jewish people involved in the Metropolitan Republican Club of New York City. They invited Gavin McInnes to give a speech, where he had a fake sword and reenacted some sort of I forget the exact name of the guy, but it was an anti-communist who committed an assassination of a communist in Japan. He did like a humorous recreation of that to start his speech at the Metropolitan Republican Club. First, the Antifa, they terrorized the club, they vandalized it, threatened more violence if you do bring Gavin in. So they brought Gavin in anyway. They heroically stood up to this gang of terrorist bullies named Antifa. And then when they were leaving the Metropolitan Republican Club event, they were ambushed by Antifa. But the problem is, a lot of Proud Boys were there. That is the fraternal organization founded by Gavin McInnes. And these guys, they know how to fight, and they're willing to fight back against Antifa. So Antifa got BTFO'd. They got the shit beat out of them by real men. So what happens after that? Well, the Proud Boys are the ones who the fake news media reports as the terrorist threat. And that totally fictional up is down narrative was pushed not only by the liberal media, not only by the Democratic politicians of New York, but the Republican rag, or I shouldn't say Republican, neocon rag of the National Review pushed the lie as well. The Republican governor candidate Molinaro of New York, he came out and issued a virtue signaling condemnation against the Proud Boys after the fact, based on the completely false, upside down media reports. So Antifa has a great deal of establishment support. After they commit their terrorism, if they're charged at all, those charges are usually dropped mysteriously in the weeks following the assault they commit. So that there's a national network of leftist lawyers who will defend these people, defend these terrorists for free. And it's all very well coordinated, and we all know who's funding it. Not limited to George Soros. There's others as well, but Soros is the most out in front, most brazen individual funding this type of left-wing terrorism. So it's really sickening what's going on. I think we saw the most sickening display of this terrorism this past week at Tucker Carlson's house.
Yeah, absolutely. What happened with Tucker Carlson was an absolute disgrace. So for those who don't know about this story, I believe it was the day after the election, or maybe it was 2 days after the election, during the Tucker Carlson Tonight Show, a mob of Antifa protesters showed up at his house. According to Tucker's wife, one of them threw themselves into their door and cracked the door. They chanted things such as, "You are not safe." They chanted over and over again, "Tucker Carlson, we will fight. We know where you sleep at night." And his wife ended up hiding in the pantry until the police got there. And obviously this was a heinous act of terrorism. A heinous act of terrorism that a Vox co-founder ended up endorsing on Twitter, saying that it was merely tactically wrong and not actually condemning what these people did. His exact quote was, "I think the idea behind terrorizing his family, like it or not, is a strategy. is to make them feel some of the fear that the victims of MAGA-inspired violence feel, thanks to nonstop racial incitement coming from Tucker, Trump, etc. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's be very clear. This is what mainstream left-wing media, not just personalities, but co-founders of major left-wing media platforms are willing to say about you if you disagree with them. They are willing to paint literal terrorism against you as a strategic choice, and then go on to explain the ideas behind why they did it as if it is a justification. And libertarians need to understand this, because it's not very long until they say that people who advocate for cutting spending are, deserving of this same treatment. People who believe that we should have lower taxes are deserving of this same treatment. The fact of the matter is that there are mainstream, major people within the left wing who are radicalizing people to do things like what happened to Tucker Carlson. And they believe that they were vindicated by the fact that the Democrats won the House. So people who are upset that the left feels vindicated, this is evidence that you are correct. They do feel vindicated. They feel like they can do to Republicans on a more grand scale the things that they have done on college campuses and at the inauguration and other instances in the past. Now, this has even affected my own local community. My congressman, Tom Reed, who, to be honest with you, I am not a fan of, had a guillotine set up outside his office in a flash mob protest outside of one of his campaign offices toward the end of the election cycle. So this is moving forward at an alarming rate. One more word about Tucker Carlson specifically. There was another instance involving his daughter at a country club. A man who described himself as a gay Latino man had a verbal altercation with her when she was coming out of the bathroom. He called her a cunt coming out of the bathroom. And what happened after that is a little bit unclear. It seems that Tucker Carlson's son threw some wine at the guy. Quite frankly, I would have applauded it if he threw punches at the guy. Somebody comes at your little sister like that, the gloves come off as far as I'm concerned. But now Michael Avenatti, the creepy porn lawyer, Democrat frontrunner for president, is representing the man who verbally attacked Tucker Carlson's daughter, claiming that Tucker assaulted him. This is a man who has major Democrat donors behind him, backing him, advising his potential 2020 campaign. And these are the kind of tactics that those people who are behind him support. And we have seen this far too often with people like Maxine Waters, people like Cory Booker, people like Hillary Clinton. It's not a few minor bad actors. These are major left-wing political forces who are out there signaling to their followers that it is okay to do this kind of thing to prominent conservatives, so long as it is in the name of so-called social justice. And we all need to accept and understand as libertarians that pushing back against this is the only way that that our voice remains remotely in the mix in the political process. If this is allowed to stand, allowed to continue, every conservative opinion, every right-wing limited government opinion will eventually be socially regulated out of our society. And we have got to push back against that.
And what they hate the most about Trump is that they perceive him as a libertarian. They hate his tax cuts, his deregulation, his disrespect toward bureaucrats, and so on and so forth. That's what they hate. They hate the libertarian aspects of Trump the most, and that's what they're willing to commit terrorism to stop. They don't care that Trump wants to spend more on infrastructure. They don't care that Trump wants to, renegotiate trade deals that most of the leftists have been against, since the days where the U.S. entered the World Trade Organization. It's always been protested by lefties, and Bernie Sanders made that a big issue in his campaign. So they don't mind a lot of what Trump does. What they really hate is the libertarian free market aspects of what Trump's doing. Even the minor cuts, they think, even the minor cuts that Trump is doing right now that are just paltry and nothing in comparison to spending increases for the military, even that to them is treason, baby killing, blah blah blah. So it is going to happen to libertarians, and libertarians need to understand. They need to realize that burying their heads in the sand and wilting and trying to go under the radar, that may save you for a little while, but once these guys are emboldened, they're coming after everyone. And the one thing that really gets my goat about libertarians is the ones who say that this big brother Orwellian shutdown of conservatives on social media is that's just the free market at work. No, it's not the free market at work. It is tech companies bullied by bureaucrats and special interests and oligarchs into taking moves that actually hurt their bottom line to satisfy the whims of a violent political mob. So this is anti-free market. The people pushing this hate the free market. They want global censorship. And if it was a profit-driven society, if it was really a profit-driven, market-based society that we lived in, then a competitor like Gab would be able to compete. And they'd probably be able to out-compete Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and so on. But they're not. They're choked off. Their payment processors are choked off because it's a monopoly that Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover sucks, but basically 4 credit card payment processors. And they won't go against the leftist terror mob. They will cut off whoever the mob tells them to cut off. So that's a monopoly. That's anti-free market. And until libertarians can understand that and are at least willing to speak out against it, nobody should take them seriously, frankly. If they can't understand the nuances of these complicated political issues in this day and age, they deserve to be irrelevant, and many of them are.
Well, I think that there really is a question here in the libertarian movement, which is the social media platforms are certainly censoring a particular political perspective. And one of the questions is, what do we do about that? Now, I think that an important part of the conversation, as you say, is to condemn what they are doing and not just say, oh, that's the free market, tough crap. The fact of the matter is that having a culture of free expression is also a part of libertarianism, and having a society where people feel free to express their ideas, make their arguments, voice their opinions, for better or for worse, is not only part of a libertarian society, it's actually the only way that you get the best ideas to go forward. It's actually the only idea that the cream can rise to the top. If you suppress the voices of people who disagree with you, it creates an intellectual climate that is so stifled that your society will fall behind others in the social pecking order, so to speak. So I think that there is a genuine question there. I don't think that it is, at this point, a viable option to use force against these platforms. I think one thing you can do is look at what they have done in the context of how it relates to current law. So there are laws in place that distinguish publishers from platforms. And if platforms are acting more like publishers, then certainly I think that's something we should look at. And if those laws are on the books as we speak, then they should certainly be enforced. But as far as the payment processors go, as far as some of these other issues, I think actually the best solution going forward is to use the large voices that we do have currently, which we do need to keep in mind. There are very large conservative platforms that are still currently out there, to defend each other, to pick each other up, and to see if we can start funding some real serious alternatives. I think Gab is a great example of such an alternative. We need to fight hard to make sure that they don't have any legal consequences for what people publish on their platforms, since they have been truly a platform and not a publisher like Facebook and Twitter arguably have been. And, I think that if some viable platforms start to emerge as alternatives, then this problem will go away a lot faster. I mean, people don't remember, well, they do remember, but they seem to be forgetting in the light of this discussion, that social media is still a relatively new thing, and it can be supplanted. A lot of people thought that 3 TV networks was going to be the standard forever, and it wasn't. A lot of people thought that cable news would be the standard forever, and that wasn't. Things will adapt, and as they adapt, we have to adapt and move forward and keep on pushing. So I'm not to the point where I think that we should use government force to force the social media platforms to keep certain voices up there. What I would say is that they have to abide by the laws that are currently on the books, and I don't think they are. So Ted Cruz has talked a little bit about this when he questioned Mark Zuckerberg in their committee meeting, and I think the Senate should look more into it.
No doubt, and yeah, that would be the probably the least invasive way to cut these organizations down to size would be by making sure that they are, if they don't abide by the First Amendment, if they don't uphold neutrality, that they won't be given that special exemption where they are not liable for everything published on the website. They act like a partisan publisher. They deserve to be treated like a partisan publishing entity under the law. But another issue that's kind of interesting and I think relevant for libertarians is the recent kerfluffle regarding Trump and Armistice Day. So from my understanding of the issue is Trump was scheduled to attend some sort of Armistice Day celebration overseas in France. Because of inclement weather, Trump did not attend the event. Now, that may have been an excuse for Trump not to attend. It did seem like it was a big globalist stunt to try to make Trump look bad by making it making it all about how evil nationalism caused the World War I, which is complete horseshit. And we'll get into that in a minute. But they tried to make Trump look bad on this because he missed a photo op. It is it's the new reason why Trump should be impeached, because it doesn't matter what Trump actually accomplishes. It doesn't matter that Trump helped stabilize the Syrian regime so it didn't get overthrown by Islamists. It doesn't help that Trump stopped Obama's policy of funding radical Islamic groups in the Middle East like ISIS. Doesn't matter that Trump has bolstered military spending to try to help the troops. It doesn't matter that Trump is actually doing all these different things to try to live up to his promises to help veterans. But that doesn't matter. The fact that he missed a photo op and wasn't there to read from the same script as all the other leaders, and that's what's important to the globalists. And seeing people like Max Boot and Bill Kristol, dyed-in-the-wool neocons who have blood on their hands from the atrocities in Iraq. They pushed lies to get us into Iraq. Now they're talking about how unpresidential and cowardly Trump was for missing this event. So it's just so insulting to the intelligence of anyone who doesn't have amnesia, anyone who remembers, what happened a few years ago regarding Libya, and then a decade and a half ago in Iraq. So I think this is a great example of that libertarians should look at, of how Trump is bucking the globalist status quo, in ways that are good and ways that trend more toward non-interventionism than interventionism. What do you think, Rocco?
Well, the whole controversy is sort of, I have to laugh a little bit because it's a little, I shouldn't laugh because it is serious, but these people are so immature. So Trump misses the ceremony, and to be clear, I'm not sure if the comments I'm about to mention were made before or after Trump missed the ceremony, but Macron, in another portion of his visit, where Trump was standing alongside Putin and some other world leaders at this Armistice Day celebration, Macron said that patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism, and that nationalism is a betrayal of patriotism, and went on to say that nationalism essentially is saying that our interests are first and who cares about others, which erases a nation's moral values. So Trump has described himself as a nationalist very recently. So Macron was obviously saying that Trump has betrayed patriotism, and said so right there, right in front of his face, which is a tremendously rude thing to do, a borderline verbally abusive comment. And it's amazing to me how people never talk about that. You know, people will nitpick Donald Trump for telling Jim Acosta to give the microphone back and stop being an asshole, but they will not, criticize Macron for saying that Donald Trump isn't a patriot, essentially. So from the Macron side, it was just childish, and it was more of this posturing from a leader who has really, while he's done some good things in comparison to some other European leaders, generally been fairly feckless. Now, as far as the neoconservatives go, who have been just jumping on every opportunity to insult Trump over any tiny thing, they're doing this because Trump has actually done more to prevent world wars than any American president in modern history, through his attempts at creating genuine alliances with people like Kim Jong-un, like Vladimir Putin, by trying to eliminate these long-standing conflicts that have threatened our nation for such a long time. He is going against the neoconservative foreign policy establishment, and some of his successes prove that people like Max Boot, people like Bill Kristol, who have a history and record of being wrong, which is only rivaled by, Paul Krugman's predictions on economics, he is proving that people like them are wrong once again. And because they are people who lack the capacity to look at their history, who lack the capacity to look at where their predictions have led in the past, and who cannot, own up to when they have been wrong, they decide to act like a child towards Donald Trump. So really, it's all a manufactured controversy that just highlights how childishly people act toward this president. Was the weather bad enough that he should have left, and have other presidents gone in bad weather? I don't even care about these issues. I don't even really want to discuss it. It's ridiculous. I mean, I want to discuss the way that these people are reacting, don't get me wrong, because that is an absolutely illuminating thing. But the fact that we are just shows the level of person that we are dealing with here, and I think that's a big takeaway for me.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely shows the character of these people, and really they're just preaching to the choir. Macron's approval ratings are just they're almost as low as Merkel's. He's not a popular leader. He's posturing against Trump and the Ruskies and even the Chinese when there's just drastic problem with the immigration in this country. The migrants are overrunning the country, and it's a nightmare. He won't lift a finger to stop them, but he's obsessed with talking macho against Trump, even though Trump has been friendly toward him publicly and wants to work with him. He's dedicated to looking macho. And one of the things he said recently that was incredibly troubling was that he wants a European military buildup. He wants the European Union to have an army that will, stand militarily to oppose the United States, China, and Russia. And he parsed it in a weird way, almost like he was saying that, Europe needs to take more responsibility for its own defense, which obviously is a good thing that we want, but by creating an EU army, that does not seem to be the way to go. I mean, maybe nationalism, maybe if he said, we need to have a national buildup of our military, I'd probably be against that too, but I mean, at least that makes sense on some level. But in terms of just making a European Union army, That's crazy. That's going to cost more money from the member states of the EU countries, and they're going to get more pissed that people are wasting that leaders like Macron are wasting their time on military buildups when they should just be fixing these problems in the country, getting the migrants out, getting these third world Muslims out, or putting them in a country where they'd be more accustomed, where they would be less of a threat. He's not doing any of that. He's doubling down on all the same failed policies. He's talking against Salvini in Italy, Orban in Hungary. He's talking against these strong leaders who are actually popular when he's a weak leader who's very unpopular. So I just don't see their parlor tricks working. I see the same people, just jerking off all over themselves, as they repeat the same recycled nonsense that no one believes anymore. So as infuriating as it is, it makes my blood boil, but you just got to laugh at the end of the day because these people are, they're shooting blanks, they're out of tricks, and it's really, they're doing things that indicate absolute desperation. It really makes you think, what's going on behind the scenes, and it also shows you that yesterday's conspiracy theory will be confirmed today. I remember there were some conspiracy type people. I may have even been one of them who said that the EU is going to become militarized. They're going to want an army. They're going to start more directly opposing the United States now that the United States is going in a more nationalist direction. A lot of conspiracy theorists said that, and they were completely written off by the establishment, called every name in the book, and so on and so forth. Well, now it's actually happening. It's happening right in front of us. So, how is that helping the public discourse? They're proving conspiracy theorists right at every turn, and then on the other hand, they're acting in a conspiratorial fashion to take these same people's rights away. The conspiracy theorists with all the credibility. So it's a bizarre situation. It's uncharted waters that we're headed into, but it's a very dangerous situation, and yet very exciting because it does seem like globalism is finally collapsing.
Well, and it's interesting because I just don't think that at the end of the day, if any of it is going to matter in terms of their attacks having any impact. So I think the word desperate is correct. It's a desperate ploy by people who sort of don't have anything else but to talk about these sorts of petty things that don't really matter. And the reason why they don't have anything else is because economic growth is going great. We're not getting ourselves into new wars. We're cutting more regulation than we had before, and business investment is going up. And all of these really great things are happening in the country right now, and people are noticing it. We're having real wage growth for the first time, really, in my adult life. So it's an extremely encouraging development, and they can't talk about extremely encouraging developments because they decided that this man was literally Hitler before he even took office. So, some people, I'm not the first person to say that, but it really is true that once you go to literally Hitler, you never go back and say, oh, this guy's doing a good job. So that's all we're seeing here. We're seeing a bunch of emotionally immature people who weren't able to admit that they were wrong, and they are trying to take every last bit of what they can. They're throwing the kitchen sink at the wall, so to speak, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Now, on the point of Macron and European military, I have some mixed feelings on that because I've always thought that the United States subsidizing the defense of Europe was helping to pay for a lot of their socialist programs, and I've always been very against that. So, in the abstract, I am in favor of European nations increasing their military size to make up for the fact that we have been allowing them to free ride on our defense for so long. What I don't like you said, is the European Union aspect of it. The European Union is, like you say, a more globalist setup where we need to be devolving into smaller nation states, more localized forms of representation, because the right to self-determination is paramount to a libertarian society. So people talk about Donald Trump in the libertarian community and his support of nationalism sometimes as if it's a bad thing. Not when the alternative is globalism. You really have to look at the political landscape as it is evolving in international politics when you assess statements like, I am a nationalist. Donald Trump is trying to go against these major conglomerations like what's happening with the EU. And really, as libertarians, we have no ideological reason to do anything but support that.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the lesser of two evils, by a wide margin. I know libertarians hate that line, which is why sometimes I like using it to get under their skin. Speaking of getting under the skin of libertarians, you have done that very well in recent weeks. In particular, regarding the new, leader de jour of the movement, the next, the newest, guy who's supposed to supplant Ron Paul as the real leader of the libertarians. This gentleman from New York by the name of Larry Sharpe. And to be sure, Larry Sharpe gives a great speech. Seems like he's a well-meaning guy, at least peripherally. He's, there's been a lot worse candidates from the Libertarian Party. Sharpe's probably one of the better ones, but you've had a run-in of sorts with Sharpe supporters in the state of New York. It's kind of an interesting story. Definitely is a great anecdote for what we're talking about, the problems we want to talk about that are happening in the libertarian movement or what's left of it. So talk about your what's happened with you regarding Sharpe and his supporters over the last several weeks.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's kind of been sort of a weird display of immaturity is the best way that I can put it. So I went to Larry Sharpe's event at Cornell. I believe it was maybe 2 weeks before the election. I'm not exactly sure. And I went with a couple of questions, but only ended up actually getting one out because, frankly, his answer was so appalling that I felt no further need to consider him as a candidate. So I asked him whether he would pledge to not run on a ticket with Bill Weld in 2020. The reason why should be clear to anybody who cares about conservatism and anyone who cares about liberty. If you are a limited government individual, if you care about pushing back against neoconservatism, if you care about pushing back against the deep state, pushing back against the national security establishment, then you have an obligation to oppose Bill Weld. Bill Weld supported the Patriot Act, supported the Iraq War, supported the continuation of the Afghanistan War, supported massive gun control measures, all of these really awful things. He was a prototypical Mitt Romney Republican as governor of Massachusetts. So I asked Larry Sharpe, are you going to run on a ticket with this person who has this history of being a gun-grabbing neoconservative, which for Republican voters who he was mostly targeting at the time, and who mostly, if you look at the county-by-county results, the Republican ones were the ones where he did best. So it was mostly Republicans who he was really targeting, and those people deserve to know the answer to this question. So his very first words were to tell me that I pulled my question out of my ass. And I have to tell you, I have been a part of interviews for candidates on a much larger level than Larry Sharpe. I've been a part of interviews for congressional candidates, congressmen, senators, as part of my previous media work, and I have never had a candidate or a government official of any kind respond to a question in such a demeaning and immature manner. So right off the bat, he says that and proceeds to essentially just avoid my question, ask me how it affects me, etc., etc. I begin explaining to him why it's important to me, and he cuts me off by telling me that I shouldn't vote for him, I should vote for the Republican, which, again, I have, been part of probably over a dozen candidate interviews in my small amount of time during doing political activism. Never heard a candidate tell me, don't vote for me. So I went to social media, I told people about this, and what I saw was a horde of Larry Sharpe supporters come to the defense of the idea that these were remotely acceptable things for a Libertarian Party candidate to say. These people included his campaign manager, included a couple of his campaign staffers, and really it was an eye-opening experience as to how unserious this candidate was. You know, this is somebody who went around saying that he was going to either win or come in second place. He raised $450,000 that could have gone to real Libertarian candidates who actually had a chance. So after talking all this smack about how he was going to come in either first or second, and how he was the real alternative to Andrew Cuomo, and the much more serious candidate than the Republican nominee, Mark Molinaro, who I was not a fan of. I just have to put that out there. I did vote for him, but that was just as a repudiation of Cuomo more than anything else. I wasn't really a fan. But Sharpe ended up getting 1.57% of the vote. He actually came in fourth behind the Green Party candidate. So all of these people within the Libertarian movement who, denigrated what I was saying, claimed that Sharpe's response was valid, and proceeded to ignore the serious red flag that he displayed. We could have seen this coming a lot sooner, and we could have diverted these resources to a much better candidate. And I think that that's the real lesson of that rather ridiculous episode, to be quite frank.
Yeah, I mean, I watched it happen. I mean, I would have participated, but I'm banned continuously from Facebook these days, so I was just kind of gawking at it, like laughing at the different comments as all that nonsense went down. Because again, Sharpe was a guy who, of all the candidates that I saw in the Libertarian Party, he was by far the best in terms of a guy who seemed like he had a pretty good social media profile, seemed like he was a serious candidate. I know I watched him on the Joe Rogan Experience. He did a decent job getting across the ideas of liberty there. So it seemed like, more than most guys, this might actually be a Libertarian candidate worth supporting. So your experience with him proved otherwise, proved that, this guy, he's not running to win. So might he be running to scam people, scam poor Libertarians out of money? I know we've suspected Austin Peterson of doing this in multiple campaigns that he hasn't come close to winning, vanity campaigns, the type of guy who, a lot of these guys, like Sharpes and Petersons of the world, if they were humble and they cared about the cause, they would do what many liberty-minded individuals did, which is run locally, run for county commission, run for state house, run for these candidacies that you can actually win as a Republican. Then you get in there, you're in the mix, and at the very least, you can be a fly in the ointment, exposing all the bastards as they do awful things continuously within our government against the people. So that's what a lot of people have done. That's what Eric Brakey did in Maine, even though he lost recently. He did it the right way. Mm-hmm. He deserves kudos. He deserves kudos for that, even though he lost in Maine. Probably shouldn't have ran nationally, but hey, at the very least, he's doing it the right way. There's other guys doing it the right way, and they may mess up, but good for them for doing it the right way. Sharpe did not do it the right way, and he was front running from the get go. Running in a party that's not serious, even though they got, major party status. That basically just means they get a federal welfare check. So it doesn't really mean much other than that. So yeah, it's ridiculous. And another thing that speaks to Sharpe being a likely scammer was you kind of uncovered something about his involvement in multi-level marketing campaigns. So would you speak on that for a little bit, Rocco?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that your comparison of Austin Peterson and Larry Sharpe is spot on. And Libertarians need to do a better job of vetting these people. Larry Sharpe, he talks a lot about his business experience, but when you actually look at his website, it's very light on specifics. It's very light on, when it says that he's trained all of these people for these businesses, very light on who those people were, what they do with those businesses, and most importantly, in my opinion, he very prominently features a multi-level marketing, uh, either training or some sort of a course. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but it was an involvement in multi-level marketing that I think should concern just about anybody, because multi-level marketing is, of course, a scam. It is a way to take advantage of people who generally have low IQs, who generally don't know basic math, don't understand how to put together a business model. And his involvement in it means one of two things. Either he thinks multi-level marketing is legitimate, in which case he's wrong, and it's okay to be wrong, but to base a business career, at least in some part, on something like that, I think is, disqualifying. And the other point is, if he's not wrong, then he is being dishonest, which is a whole other can of worms that I won't even get into. I'm just going to assume he is genuinely wrong and believes all the things he's saying about multi-level marketing. But, you look into these people a little bit, and you realize that if there was a tiny amount of scrutiny put to them, if they ever managed to become serious candidates, they would crumble. Austin Peterson, the same thing. All you have to do is YouTube Austin Peterson, Christopher Cantwell, and you will disqualify that man for any elected office immediately. The fact that libertarians have taken either of those people seriously, to me, is a testament to the fact that they are not being serious about getting people elected. You need to have people who actually have a background in doing something real. I thought that Rick Breckenridge out in Montana, I saw the Montana Senate debate, and I was very impressed with him. He was a libertarian candidate out there, and he was a professional surveyor, actually done something in his life. A surveyor is a real job, and he really articulately, put out the libertarian positions in a way that resonated with the locals in his population. And then he had the good sense to realize that the race was too important to risk going to John Tester, and he dropped out and endorsed Matt Rosendale, the Republican, which ultimately it didn't make a difference. I wish he had never run to begin with. But I would rather see people like Rick Breckenridge come from the Libertarian Party than people like Larry Sharpe. Breckenridge might not have this flashy persona and this, P.T. Barnum delivery, quite frankly, but he has real experience and he's somebody who has done real things. Maybe Larry Sharpe is too. I'm open to the argument. His websites did not show that to me at all when I did some looking into his business background.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like he's just another grifter, kind of latching on to the libertarian movement. A lot of, libertarianism, unfortunately, is susceptible to these MLM scams. I remember Doug Weed, who was, like a Bush-era hack, who kind of glommed himself onto the Rand Paul campaigns. He ended up pitching a multi-level marketing scam to unsuspecting libertarians after the campaign fizzled out. I know that Life Leadership, someone tried to push that off on me, another MLM scam devoted to, recruiting liberty-minded people, diverting their effort and resources from productive areas and, putting them into some sort of Amway-esque scammeroo. So I've seen it a bunch of different ways, and it definitely makes me think that, Larry Sharpe, he does, I do think he's competent. He's competent enough to know a big group of suckers when he sees one. A bunch of suckers who will, help him, move up, keep that, those bucks flowing in with a good group of suckers, with all that pyramid money, circulating up to him. So that definitely seems like the case in Larry Sharpe, and he knew he was never going to win. He deceived all those people to get the money out of them, and he'll keep deceiving them, I'm sure, to get those MLM bucks out of him as well. Another thing about libertarians that really irks me is that these people will tell you, "Oh, I'm my own leader. I don't need a leader. I don't need to follow anyone. I'm my own man." And then they just keep falling for these terrible cults of personality and this nonsense that the Libertarian Party has any chance of succeeding, and other scams as well. And it's very obvious that ever since Ron Paul, effectively retired, even though he still does a very excellent Liberty Report with Daniel McAdams, he is effectively out of the limelight and marginalized outside of Congress. So ever since he's left, the Libertarians have desperately needed a leader, and a lot of them are too selfish and egotistical to admit it, and then somehow end up falling for people like Sharpe and Austin Peterson, who are guys who don't really have the credentials to be a leader of the libertarian movement.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we need to start looking at people who, like I said, have done real things in their lives. I've had people ask me in the past a lot of times, why don't you run for office? Why don't you run for office? And the reason is because I haven't done anything yet. I mean, you need to have real accomplishments before you run for office. And a 26-year-old, I see all these young libertarians running for office instead of actually going out and trying to do something with their lives. And it's really unfortunate. I personally really value much more somebody who has real, legitimate private sector experience in the economy than I do someone who's run for office a whole bunch of times, like, Austin Peterson has, quite frankly. Somebody who's run a blog. I mean, it's ridiculous to put these people up there who have no real credentials and expect that they're just going to talk their way into the office. It's absolutely absurd, and the lack of credentials should point you to the fact that these people lack depth. And that's the real issue here, is that these Libertarian Party candidates and some of these internet liberty candidates, to be quite frank, these liberty candidates who make their primary basis on the internet, have just shown that they're not serious, and we can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So if I'm a libertarian looking for people who run for office, first of all, I'm looking for some older people. I'm looking for some people who've actually done some things. I'm not looking for, a young, sly, smooth-talking guy who's going to trick the voters into voting for them. You need somebody who has real experience, and I think that's the lesson for both Larry Sharpe and Austin Peterson, quite frankly.
You need to be willing to work your way up from the bottom levels of government, prove yourself that you can stand in there and deal with the amount of influences tugging at you. You can stand up against the special interests. You can, tell them, take their money and shove it. You need to show every step of the way that you have the backbone to be a leader and to be a legislator and to be a public servant. Otherwise, you're supporting these people who have no records to do the right thing just based on their word. And if they're running in the Libertarian Party, chances are they're just doing some sort of a scam, or they just have no clue on how to realistically achieve success. Again, it comes back to Ron Paul. Ron Paul languished for 30 years without having any success, but he built up a record of credibility, saying the same thing throughout time. As things got worse and worse, it became obvious that Ron Paul knew what he was talking about. If he'd just shown up out of the blue one day, saying, follow me, my ideas are right, everyone else is an idiot, everyone else is, completely out of bounds, then no one would have ever listened to him. Just like in 1988, no one really listened to him when he ran for the Libertarian Party. But then 20 years later, he was able to commandeer the Republican platform. He commandeered that platform and put an anti-establishment message that resonated into it. And we're still seeing the fruits of that with Trump, in particular his foreign policy achievements today was really built off the back of Ron Paul and his getting the word out about all these key issues. But that is the frontier. The neocons hate Trump. The leftists hate Trump. Trump is moving in the right direction on a lot of issues. So let's get in the mix, make ourselves relevant, and be the heirs to Trump's throne after 2024, hopefully, God willing, we get 2 terms out of Trump and get to see the globalists and neocons and the leftists, all lose their power, and hopefully they can never get it back from there. But we're about at 120 right now, about what we were going for with the podcast. So I think we've covered a lot of different topics for round 1. We're going to definitely, as the podcast develops, we're going to have guests on here. We don't want this to be an echo chamber. We want people who are smart to challenge us. We will definitely, have intelligent people on here to talk about the issues and have a debate and a discussion. That's definitely something we're interested in. We also have different contributors lined up. We're going to have different segments of the podcast to break things up in the future, and I think that people are really going to enjoy those when they see those come to fruition. So for the first Liberty Conservative podcast, thank you to Defiant America for hosting us. Go to defiantamerica.com. It's a great blog. I'm going to be adding a lot to it in the days, weeks, and months to come. So check out defiantamerica.com for all of the latest editions of the Liberty Conservative podcast. So for Rocco Lucente, this is Shane Trejo signing off.